Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Wallace. I just wanted to give you some information about the preliminary research proposal assignment that's on Schoology. It is due for you guys during the very first week in November, and it's something that might take a little bit of time just because there's some reading involved. So you want to spend a little bit of time ahead before you submit this assignment, okay? And so I just wanted to clarify some of the parts of the assignment. I know the sheet can be a little confusing, and I just want to describe what it is that you have to hand in and what it is that the purpose of this assignment is, okay? And as noted in class, we do a large-scale research project during the year. It's called the historical investigation. This assignment that you're handing in is not yet the historical investigation. You're really just doing some preliminary research to have the outcome where you're going to propose a question. So the whole entire intent of the preliminary research proposal is for you to read about a topic, start to explore a topic a little in depth, and then create a question that will become your investigative research question for the entire year. The parts and steps of the research proposal are on the screen, so you can kind of see some of the things that you have to do. First, you should pick a topic that you're interested in, and even though that sounds like an easy step, it's not, because you might have several topics that you're interested in. So I'm going to recommend that you explore some of the databases, in particular the Gale U.S. History database and the Gale World History database. Depending on your interests, you can put in some search terms, you can kind of bounce around within those databases to really go shopping for a topic. You might be somebody who's really interested in ancient history, you might be interested in a military topic or a political topic or something about social reforms, or you might be interested in particular people in history, something much more recent in American history, or something that is a much older topic or relates to a particular part of the world. So there's no shortage of topics, and you might need a little time to investigate some topics. And when you find a topic that you are interested in, you want to dig deep into that topic to try to find a narrow area of the topic that you might be interested in. For example, if you're very, very interested in the civil rights movement, that might be a topic that's very large, has a very big timeline to it, but there might be one particular event within the civil rights movement. It might be an event that focuses on a particular part of the United States. It might talk about a particular context for a protest that occurred. There's a variety of court cases or laws or different things that are webbed into the civil rights movement. Any one of those very specific topics might be something to pursue. So you might choose, the Brown versus Board of Ed Supreme Court case. You might choose a piece of legislation, such as the Civil Rights Act of 1965. You might choose a particular protest, such as the March on Selma. There's a variety of different ways in which you can pursue that, but by generally reading about the civil rights movement, you're more likely to find a particular aspect of the topic that you're interested in, okay? So, reading, exploring are kind of part of this task, even though there is not necessarily, you don't have to document every part of every topic you've read, okay? That's kind of on you to find that particular topic. One thing that you are going to do for the topic that you actually commit to and decide to research more in depth, you are going to be asked to summarize some of your research. So maybe you looked at 6 different topics and you ultimately pick the Brown versus Board of Education decision, and you're interested in pursuing that as a very, very specific topic. And you might look at some of the effects in a particular state on school systems and on integration based on the Brown versus Board of Ed decision that occurred in 1954. So if you're going to be researching that, we know that you're going to be presenting some information about the Supreme Court case, who was involved in it, how did it ultimately get decided, were there any dissenting opinions, and what did it mean for legislation and the issues of school segregation in certain states. And say, for example, you're interested in New Jersey or you're interested in Mississippi, what did it ultimately mean? Okay, so when you start to research that particular narrow aspect of your topic, you can document it and know that you're going to be orally sharing your research and recording yourself, either in a video or an audio format for a few minutes. Okay, this is a way that it takes you not only reading about the topic, but you want to be able to describe it. So it's kind of like, Mrs. Wallace, this is what I learned about Brown versus Board of Ed. First, I learned that, boom, 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 boom. Then next, I learned that, and you're summarizing some of the research. You might be citing sources, but you're describing the research that you did, and you're doing that in an oral format. You might also include in that description why you're interested in the topic. Maybe you studied this topic in middle school and you have a particular interest in it. It could be a variety of reasons why you have an interest in the topic that you choose, okay? And you're welcome to share that as well. You also want to include a proposed question, and there's two parts to this preliminary research proposal, and I put in blue the two parts that you need to do in an audio clip or in a video clip. Either is fine. Say it's just an audio clip and you can just actually record yourself right on Schoology, and then it gets submitted and uploaded. Once you describe the topic that you've researched, so say 5 minutes of overview on the topic that you've researched, you also want to propose your research question, a very, very narrow research question, and that's something that you're going to do in an oral format. In addition, there are two pieces that you should do in writing. One will be simply 4 sources that get listed in MLA format. Okay, it's like a bibliography, similar to the way you've done other bibliographies. You're just going to put 4 sources. For our purposes now, encyclopedia type sources are fine. So say that I'm doing the Brown versus Board of Ed topic. One source might be Brown versus Board of Education summarized in Britannica. Then I might also have another source from the website of the NAACP. They have a huge history and involved in that particular topic. The attorneys that fought the case, the Brown versus Board of Ed case, were hired by the NAACP, so I might be interested in Thurgood Marshall. Some of the sources that I pull can be background sources that helped me understand the topic, okay? That's something in writing, the 4 sources. I also need to include in writing 2 OPVLs. So out of my 4 sources, I'm picking 2 that I'm going to do origin, purpose, value, and limitation. Maybe there's some sort of something about the way in which Brown versus Board of Ed was used and applied in the state of Mississippi. Maybe there's a newspaper article, for example, and once I find that newspaper article, I'm going to not only include it in my list of 4 sources, I'm also going to write an OPVL for that source. Okay, so the origin of the source, that comes from whatever the description is of how and in what way the source was created. Then the purpose of the source, maybe the purpose of the source was to share some information to people within Mississippi. Maybe it was an editorial and people had a particular point of view. There's a variety of different ways that you can OPVL. For any OPVL, you're always looking at the question, how well did the sources help you with your research question, okay? So you're attaching the OPVLs to the research question that you're proposing, okay? So you've spent some time in an audio format describing the research that you did, and again, it's preliminary. You're going to continue to research, but this is your first, work in it. Then you're also going to propose a question, okay, that you think you're going to be pursuing, and then you're also in writing going to do, based on that question, here's my 4 sources that help me find out about that question. This is the 4 sources I used for my summary of the research, and I'm also going to share in writing my 2 OPVLs, okay? And your oral description might be something that another student in the class is going to have an opportunity to provide some feedback on, okay? And I'll also be able to provide some feedback on it, okay? And when you have to explain some of the research, it forces you to put in your own words some of what you found, okay? And it can help you remember some of the things that you've researched, okay? And that's the intent behind that. The way in which you can think about some sample questions, okay, because a lot of you are emailing me, how's this question, how's this question, okay, and keep in mind that the questions that I have on the screen are questions that students ended up with. They didn't start with these questions, so you might start out with something broad. I have an interest in the Vietnam War. To what extent was Agent Orange, used in the Vietnam War? To what extent did it cause high mortality rates in the Vietnam War? And then as I research that more, I might come up with a more specific question, okay? So the questions that I have on the screen, I'm just going to note them. You can see with some of these questions that they are specific, and they also all start out with the phrase, to what extent, okay? There's a reason for that, because we want our questions to be open-ended. We want them to invite multiple answers. So we start out with the phrase, to what extent. You're not proposing questions that are what or when questions, what were the causes of the Revolutionary War, because that would just be a bulleted list of a whole bunch of things. We're asking, to what extent was one particular thing the cause of the Revolutionary War, okay? So one question we have here is a sample. To what extent did the Poor Law Extension Act in Ireland, enacted by the British government during the Great Famine in Ireland from 1845 to 1851, increase the amount of Irish suffering, okay? This is a debatable question. It's about a particular law, the Poor Law Extension Act. It's a particular law that's passed in Ireland and actually passed by the British government on Ireland. And it has to do with the ways people can be affected by some of the British rule during a time of great famine. I had a student who was really, really interested in Ireland. She was going to visit Ireland, and she wanted to study the relationship between Great Britain and Ireland. She had been under the impression that the potato famine in Ireland was connected to policies that the British government imposed on Ireland, and she wanted to pursue, was that actually the case? And so she researched and found this particular law, the Poor Law Extension Act, as one of the policies that Britain imposed, and she wanted to see, did it have actual consequences? And so part of her answer could have been, well, yes, it did. This law increased the amount of Irish suffering. Maybe there was an alternative answer. It didn't at all increase the amount of Irish suffering. She was going to investigate, to what extent did this law increase the amount of Irish suffering? Maybe it did a lot. Maybe it did a little, maybe it did in some ways and not other ways. So there's a whole spectrum of answers that she could evaluate and weigh, okay? Another question that I had a student do, to what extent did Alexander, meaning Alexander the Great's, military tactics in the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC allow the Macedonians to win the battle? Okay, so this is a battle which takes place against Darius, who's a Persian, and historians debate, did Alexander the Great win the battle because of his leadership and the way that his army was trained, or is it because, Darius and the Persians messed up? Was it because the terrain was really rough? Historians debate why this outcome of Alexander the Great's side winning the battle, why did that happen? Any type of question that you write that kind of taps into a place where historians debate is automatically going to make a really good HI question, because we know that there'll be multiple answers. To what extent did Alexander's military tactics really make the difference? Either they did a lot, they did a little, maybe they did in conjunction with other things, or maybe they didn't at all of those possibilities. There might be some evidence that suggests that, okay? And the very last question that I have as a sample here, to what extent was the Black Death responsible for the Peasants' Revolt of 1391, okay? This is 1381, sorry, I don't have my glasses on. This is a question for a student who happened to be really interested in the plague, right? Kind of, we're in a pandemic now. There's certainly been pandemics in the past. How much did this plague actually create the Peasants' Revolt? And this is a particular Peasants' Revolt that happens in a particular place in Germany in 1381. And, what's not implied implied in this is maybe there were other reasons that caused the Peasants' Revolt. So if it wasn't the Black Death, what else could it have been? And this student's research would have to include that. So it's kind of like the, what caused